Hey guys, Chris Fluck here, Chris Fluck Podcast, episode 17. Today's guest, we have Megan Kanan here, sports psychologist. How you doing?
Good.
Good, thanks for coming down. Just to give you guys a quick introduction here to Megan here. I'll let you talk here and introduce yourself a little bit. So tell us about yourself.
Yeah, so I am a sports psychologist. I run a practice here in the Lehigh Valley where I have the opportunity to consult with athletes both individually in my office. I also work with teams in the area and across the country, just doing sports psychology work with them as teams throughout the season, or sometimes it's just one or two times throughout their training season or year. And then I also do speaking at different conferences.
Cool.
Yeah.
I forgot to introduce my baby's here too, so if you hear a baby in the background, sorry about that. So anyway, in terms of education and stuff like that, so you grew up in the Lehigh Valley, which is the area that we are in currently. And then what happened after that? You went to high school at Central Catholic?
Yes, went to high school at Central Catholic in Allentown, and then went to Wilkes University where I was a psych major. And then after that went to Nova Southeastern University in Fort Lauderdale, where I got my PhD in clinical psych. And while I was there, had the opportunity to do a clinical rotation in a sports psychology clinic. Yeah. So at that time, it was where I really got immersed into the specialization and started to pursue it.
When you were, and then growing up too, we talked before we went on here, you competed as a swimmer.
Yes.
Any other sports or anything growing up?
Yeah, I swam. Swimming and softball were the two primary sports. I dabbled a little bit in basketball and like the CYO realm.
Yeah.
And then I also danced for 19 years. So that was what I continued to do in college and was on a team. It was my minor.
Oh, so in college, dance team.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Yeah.
What does that entail in terms of like, so what did you, if you were competing, what would the name of that competition be? Was it like
we just primarily would do and dance at basketball games and different events that the school had, yeah.
So getting into the sports psychology stuff, so I know what I was like growing up in terms of some of the issues I potentially had, so that when I got older and you're like coaching people, you could see some issues that, you could kind of relate to somebody if they're like maybe a little bit critical and you're like, you think I was like that growing up, this, that, and the other thing. Getting into that, when you were competing, coming up, like, did any of that influence your decision to kind of get into sports psychology, or were you like looking back like you wish you known some of this stuff back in the day or whatever? So
so often when I learn things, and even when I talk to other coaches and trainers, and I feel the overall consensus amongst us all is I wish we would have had something like this. And relating it back to my own experience and just in hearing what a lot of the athletes that I talk with now and hearing what they're going through. Now that I'm able to look back on it, I feel like there was a lot of anxiety there with performing, especially in softball, because you have to just kind of wait. And the ball might come to you, it might not. The ball might not ever go anywhere. And then, and so it, now I'm looking back, I think I'm able to articulate a little bit more what I went through. And so now I really am able to see, not only through the athletes I work with and see how they use it and ultimately is helpful for them, but I am able to then link it back to, oh man, I really wish that this would have been there back then. I think these situations would have gone differently, or maybe I would have chosen to compete in softball in college, and went even further with it. But it's interesting always looking back and having that new perspective. Yeah.
I think do you remember that you were talking about softball? Do you remember a guy, does Chuck Knobloch come up at all with baseball stuff? Where in the sense that, so he was he played with the Minnesota Twins, probably an all-star a few times, gets Yankees bring him in, and he couldn't throw the ball from second base to first base anymore.
Yips.
So he had one of those cases. So you could even see it going, you see that stuff when you're younger and you're like,
oh, absolutely.
How is this happening? This guy's supposed to be a professional. But you were just saying that about softball too, and I was thinking too, it's got to be hard to think you just get so far in your head with what's going on sometimes just by being idle. That when it do come, you overthink it a bit. I always think too, you always worry, growing up too, you always worry about stuff. So when you see that with other kids, you got to try to figure out a way to whatever kind of anxiety or stressor they have to kind of eliminate that. But so in terms of softball, swimming, stuff like that, what are some of the biggest issues you see? Say with softball, it talked about the potential for the yips. What do you see working with high school teams? I know in that one article, you were using things of using different reminders and stuff like that the girls were posting and stuff like that, it said?
Yes.
So what did you do there? How did that work out?
So we, with some of the teams and athletes I work with, some of the common themes that come up a lot oftentimes are Anxiety is a big one.
Yeah.
Whether it's
so what is, like in the field, batting, both, pitching?
But
like, what do you see?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Because I work with a number of pitchers. I work with some girls that play other field positions. Even in other sports as well, anxiety across the board has the opportunity to really have an influence there. Where whether it's athletes just get so uncomfortable before they compete. Sometimes I've had athletes that have panic attacks in competing, or have actually, gotten sick and thrown up before competing. So there's that piece to it. And then there's also those individuals that will practice very differently than what they play in competition. And so anxiety is definitely a thing that I speak a lot with the athletes about, along with confidence and other areas as well. And then in terms of the reminders, something that I'm always encouraging them to do is just paying attention to our thoughts. Our attention really is currency if we're either thinking about all of the unknowns and the things that are stressing us out, or are we thinking about what we need to do in the moment to help us perform and compete. And so having reminders, our brain has so many things that it's trying to do at any given moment. Even right now as we sit here, it's modulating the majority of our bodily functions. It's holding our attention, our posture, vocabulary, language, what we can see, hear. It's doing so many things all at one time. So if there are opportunities to set reminders or things in your environment just to help kind of give you a little nudge, or give your brain a little nudge of, oh yes, here's my mantra, or I wanted to take a couple deep breaths, or I wanted to do X, Y, or Z to just help me in these situations, having something in your environment can be really helpful to do that.
So is that like a mix of, like, what type of cues do you typically recommend, or do you do both, in the sense, like, let's say that you are a pitcher, or it doesn't really matter where you play, but is a simple cue just like breathe, or is it like something more specific in the sense of, like, I don't know, with pitching it could be like locate, or first pitch strike like something like that. Like, is it an individual based thing? Like, say you work with 10 girls on a team, each person is going to be motivated in a different way. Is that like, so you have to navigate that with everybody and try to spend enough time with everybody to kind of sort that out? Is that typically how you do it?
Yep.
then?
And that's definitely when we're having the opportunity to meet with athletes on more of an individual level, because with all of them, sometimes thinking about.
Can you grab her? Thanks.
Sometimes with all the athletes, it's a little bit different. For some of them, thinking of some of the more performance-based things are more stressful. For other ones, it really is just focusing on clearing their mind. Or for other ones, it is a mantra that they have or might be helpful. And so for some athletes, I'll have them sometimes write something on their glove, or put something on their batting gloves, or a little word or phrase, something to kind of help them out in that capacity. Other ones, maybe it's grabbing a handful of dirt. That's something Aaron Judge does when he's up to bat. And so there's a number of different things for people to think about. And it's really just for those athletes, and that's where the individual meetings, I think, are so helpful, where we're talking about the concepts and the basic skills and the theories and the goals that we're trying to make happen. But for everyone as an individual, it's going to be different of what really works for them. So we really have the opportunity to work together in figuring that out.
So it's like that, do you remember that Nomar Garciaparra hand? Did you ever see his pre-batting routine back in the day?
No.
That was crazy. It was like 20 seconds of elaborate. But anyway, that was just kind of his way to kind of step out of the box and get his mind right a little bit. Did you ever read the book Mind Gym?
Yes.
So that guy then, he's probably been doing sports psychology stuff for a very long time, but he even gives his personal experiences, like when he's golfing, and he even struggles in his own personal life with trying to get his focus directed. He talked about how, like, if he's playing a buddy at his home course, just being at his home course kind of added pressure to him, and he would have these, like, his performance he would play it safe in a sense, and not like, I guess just be loose and have his mind right and being able to play. So I don't know. So it seems that, like, it's a lifelong, a constant battle with trying to.
It is, and
focus
that's
with this stuff.
Where I think the really neat thing is, and where there's whenever you say or have the label of psychology on anything, whether it's sports or otherwise, there's automatically this very negative stigma and connotation that comes with it, when in reality, with psychology, yes, there are some individuals with that severe mental illness piece of it, but the majority of psychology really is individuals where, going through life, we know that there's going to be stressors and there's stressful situations. That's just a given. And so psychology just helps provide tools, perspectives, things for us as humans to just help handle and tackle these stressful situations better. And so with sports psych, it's doing that in the athletic setting. And so a lot of these things, to your point, they really are things we have to build and continue to grow over time. Similarly to your physical muscles, an individual in the NFL or an individual playing collegiate sports, they're not going to lift once throughout their season, or they're not going to lift once a week.
Yeah.
They're going to lift, and they are going to do it consistently and over time and continue to build onto what they're doing. And that's really, in terms of the sports psych mental piece, is what's really required to develop that skill set as well, just like those physical muscles and other pieces of your training.
Well, I mean, two thoughts there. They're kind of both going in different directions. So, everybody, we talked about this too, in the sense that like everybody's trying to gain an edge of some sort. So people are training, they're doing the physical stuff in here. Mm-hmm. But I think more now, it's a little bit more common now than it has been, like the mental side of things, but it's still kind of like pushed off to the side. But if you have a short period of time to kind of get prepared for an event, there's only so much you could do physically in a week or two or a month. Mm-hmm. But I think you could, if you just kind of refocus and try to get your mind right per se, and like, you could get more bang for your buck in a short amount of time.
Oh, absolutely.
With, some of the sports psychology or any kind of mental training stuff there. And, if me and you were competing against each other and we did have say our skills were completely identical, but you had that mental preparation, you're probably going to outperform me every time. The same with if we had the same skills and somebody was physically a little bit better, but their mental game was the same, the person that's more physically capable is probably going to win that battle too. So it's one key component that I think, it is almost like the ultimate performance enhancer. Mm-hmm. If you could kind of get your mind right, and it'll help you boost performance and all that stuff. So, when you work with the athletes and stuff, what's kind of the day one situation?
The day one, we establish what that athlete wants to get out of our meetings. So it's our opportunity to talk a little bit about what we're going to be doing, mm-hmm. and talk about what's going on. What are some of the things that they're noticing? Are there discrepancies between practice and competing? Are there times that they're experiencing stress or anxiety or really negative thoughts? Are they having a hard time focusing? What is the experience for them that kind of brought them into this meeting? And before that meeting is over, we then establish, okay, what are we going to work on? What are our goals? What are some of the things that if we could jump ahead in time, would you like to have as a result of these meetings? And so we establish our game plan for then going forward of, all right, during the next meeting, we're going to start off hitting this. And so we really establish that plan. I guess probably similarly when physical training, when someone comes in for that initial meeting, it's okay, what are your goals? Where are you at right now with what you're doing physically? Okay, and you establish that plan based on where they want to go and where they're experiencing maybe some weaknesses in their skill set. And so then we make that plan and then execute.
So if you had if you had say a team setting here, and let's say I personally just had 1 month to physically train a team, there's a few non-negotiables that I would want to get done in that month. If you have a team and it's a short amount of time, 2 weeks say, mm-hmm. Is there a certain certain non-negotiables that you're we're just going to try to master this? So it's say you got 20 people and you're I can't really work individually with everybody. What are some of those things?
So first and foremost, being that anxiety is so overwhelmingly present, not only in the world of sport, but those athletes, whether you're a collegiate, high school professional, generalizing it outside of sport. So something I always talk about is anxiety. I give them that information of what's happening in your body and why.
What are some of those things then, I guess, to just kind of let people, say you're anxious and stuff before and that bad, talking heart rate, things like that. Your
heart rate's going to increase, your stomach, you may feel like you have to go to the bathroom a bunch of times, might get a little nauseous, may lose your appetite, your heart rate, your mind might start to race, muscles could start to get tight, your legs may start to feel really heavy. So there's a lot of physical stuff that's happening. And so just to put that into context gives a little bit more of a sense of control over it. And so with breathing, out of all of the things that automatically start to happen in our body when it starts to ramp up with anxiety, breathing is one of those things, but it's also the only thing we can choose to control if we want to. As we're sitting here, and even for some of you listening, or even as we sit here, we were all breathing up and not thinking about it up until about 10 seconds ago when I mentioned it, and now we're all thinking about breathing. And so breathing is really that ultimate thing where I teach we really have to slow down our body, because when our body starts to get ramped up, now our mind starts to move faster. And so when our mind starts to move faster, especially when it starts moving in directions of stress, all the unknowns, those worst case scenarios, well, now we're really in trouble. And so with sports psychology, it's all about attention and emotional regulation. So initially we have to regulate our body and bring us down physically. And so I put that into context, and then we really learn and do some exercises and deep breathing and just helping them to then go forward and practice that not only at home, but also looking for opportunities in their sport to start weaving it into just their routine in general of playing. And then during those follow-up meetings, after we've talked about really regulating that body, it's okay, now let's talk about our mind. Because if you're deep breathing and doing all of that, yet you're still thinking about every single thing that's stressing you out, you're just going to cancel yourself out there. So we have to talk about different ways or different directions for our mind to go, because our thoughts are going to be there, but let's guide them in a direction that's going to be more helpful for us. I was at a training once, and the individual leading the training said this, and I think it's so true and kind of mind-blowing, which is the majority of stress and pressure we ever experience doesn't actually exist in the moment that we're in. It's because you're thinking ahead or you're thinking back to something that's happened. And so with the second piece of, okay, where should our mindset be going? We really work on developing skills so that our head can be where our feet are and we're in the moment rather than thinking about the next play or the next swim or the last play, last inning, last at-bat, or what you're going to have for dinner later. You're really focusing on where you're at in that moment.
And I mean, even just doing something as little as just doing that breath work could kind of get you there too, right?
Yes,
like you
absolutely.
don't even need like a specific mantra per se, but if you could just get your breathing in check,
And for some individuals, that breath is that constant anchor back to just that moment, because we can control it, we can use it at any time.
But there's like, I remember reading some stuff too, and even I did a podcast with a friend who's a New York City firefighter, and he, they always, even in his line of work, they'll get out of the truck and they tell them, I think they tell them to like put their gloves on outside so that they could stay in there and kind of like see everything and take some breaths instead of just kind of bum rushing the building. But they also talked about like optimal states of arousal and stuff like that. And I remember reading, I think it was one of these Malcolm Gladwell books or something, but they were talking about basketball, and it might have been Larry Bird or something where, they don't even remember certain things that are going on just because they got to that certain level, like that the brain just didn't even function because their heart rate or something is too elevated, or they remember up to a certain point and then it just kind of took a dip over. So, talking about some of these optimal states, like you do want to have people kind of get themselves going a little bit, but also, not to a certain.
Absolutely. There's totally, absolutely. It's like that normal distribution, curve. If you kind of picture that normal curve going back to, high school and college math and statistics, where really our body does need to be ramped up enough, because otherwise you don't care. You could go take a nap, like it's just whatever, we're not going to be there. And I, in meeting with athletes, will sometimes ask them if they've ever had the experience of like they really didn't show up maybe until that second quarter or that second half, and then all of a sudden it was like, oh, okay. And so many athletes can relate to that because they've been there. And so there definitely is a point we need to be ramped up too. But if we overdo it, we then slide back down the hill the other way in terms of performance. And so there really is an optimal performance zone, and you can do different things to help manipulate yourself up it. And breathing is definitely one of those things that can help keep you there without overdoing it and sliding back down the flip side.
And I mean, when we talked to your friend Erin it's probably months now, she even brought up something I didn't really think about, just that even, if you do get yourself to a certain point where your stomach's not feeling right, you might not consume the calories that you need, and then you're not only affecting performance mentally, but then physically if you run out of gas because you get yourself a little too worked up early in the
totally.
So, and also too, I remember reading, I think it was a track and field coach or a sprint coach or something, but they ran, I think it was like an 800-meter run, and he just had everybody kind of bring it back to 90%. So they were timing it. The first couple of times was like going all out. Then he just told the guys to go at 90%, and those 90% times were better because everybody just took a deep breath and relaxed and just kind of cruised their way around the 2 laps, as opposed to being super tense. And I see that with kids. Yeah, it was. I think it was the guy played in the NFL. It was Jay Novacek, but he ran track in college, and that was the story. But yeah, it is interesting, right? I didn't know. I was thinking like 95%, but now he said 90%. It happens with kids a lot too, where they're like super heavy-footed when they're running, or their parents see them and they're like, something's not right. We need to like try to go get some help. So they would come in here, and then I'm like, they're doing okay. He's young and he's like super tense, and he's not going to move like efficiently if he's super tense. So you just got to kind of navigate it that way. So yeah. So I guess that's a mind work there too, probably to kind of get them to relax a bit. But speaking of like the coaches and the parents and all that stuff, so you do work with both.
Yes.
And you also work with the athletes, you work with kids. So, I think sometimes there's a little bit of pressure from coaches, parents, where the player or the athlete is kind of more conscious of them as opposed to the task at hand.
Yes.
How do you navigate that? I know it's probably not easy, but you have the parent in the stands. Tell whatever you know the deal.
Yes, I have horror stories.
I mean, just the role that adults play for good and for bad, or how you even navigate some of the stuff and try to keep them on task.
Yeah.
Is it as simple as just sticking to the breath work and doing some of that stuff?
No, I mean, sometimes it's, I typically when I go in and I meet with a team, I will also try to schedule a parent meeting as well, where we're able to talk about some of those things where, the way I like to address it for parents is, for a number of parents whose children are in athletics, they themselves were athletes growing up. And even if they weren't, they were involved in whether it was art or dance or music or, like they did something.
Yeah.
But there was a reason, as in their adult life that they chose to put their kid in sport. And so across the country, I have asked parents this. I'm like, all right, so when you were making that decision of what should we sign up Bobby for, why? And I get answers like, well, to help them learn responsibility, to help them learn time management, to help them learn how to communicate with others, to help them work with others, to help them learn responsibility, like to help them be able to better overcome failure or challenges. And so these are the answers that I hear. But then when you're in the middle of it and you're waking up at Lord knows what time on a Saturday to drive them however many hours to get to some tournament, to stand outside in cold weather, and then you're paying thousands of dollars. And so there's an emotional, a time, and a financial investment. At this point, especially now with how club sports have just it's a whole billion-dollar industry, youth sports. So it's become its own little monster. So now when that's your reality, it's very hard to kind of step back, especially then if the kid's not doing well or they're not performing well, or if it's like, well, why can't they just get it? And, and so I show parents this video of, it's a U12 softball tournament that was in, I think it was Tennessee. It was actually last summer. And I mean, these parents got into an all-out fight and an all-out brawl.
Yeah.
And oftentimes I just show that and I'm like, okay, so do you remember those things we talked about in the beginning of, what you wanted to get out of your kid, and for your kid to get out of sport? Do you think that these parents are like showing that and modeling that? I to this day have asked this to parents of athletes across the country, and never once has it been, I want them to beat the kid down the street. That's never been the goal.
It almost seems like it turns into that, though.
Right, when we're so invested in it, and that emotional and financial
it's just emotional
investment.
Stuff, right? I mean, because it's like, sporting events is where like somebody could be the president of like the biggest company in the world, and they'll go to an event and
be able to
fight
act
somebody.
like a 5-year-old.
Like, what's going on here? Yeah, it's weird.
Yeah, and so that's, and it's just helping, just encourage the parents to put things back into perspective.
Yeah.
And
how often do you get to meet with the parents? Do you try to do it all the time, or is it rare? Is it like club stuff that you do it, or?
Yep. Whenever I go in, and if I'm meeting with a team for the first time or something, I'll always try to meet with the parents to have a meeting. Now, again, not all the parents show up,
right.
But at least the ones that are there, it's just, here are some tips or some things to think about in just parenting student athletes, because across the board with parents, the intention for 99% of parents, is good. They want their kids to do well. They want to give their children the best opportunity. The intention is positive.
Yeah.
We just don't always know the best way to do it. I wouldn't know the best way to do the finances for a multi-billion-dollar company. That's not my area. I wouldn't know the things to do. I would have really good intentions to not make them lose money, or but I just wouldn't know what to do. So sometimes with parents in a number of different capacities, they have that good intention. They just don't have all of the tools and all of that knowledge. And so I try to just fill in some of those gaps and give them some things to think about, which are honestly just based off of what I hear from the athletes I work with behind closed doors, of just some of their pretty negative experiences in athletics, kind of as a function of their parents.
There's a huge number of kids that just stop playing sports.
It becomes very unfun, and I've even had athletes where they're so petrified to do something, whether it's like mental, like bulking or something in gymnastics or cheerleading, that kind of stuff, where they just used to be able to do moves and now they can't. And now it's evolved into this monster where the kid's getting it thrown in their face of like, oh, well, it's cost us this much money to do this. And so if you can't do it, so now this kid's not only fearful of actually doing it, but they're stressed about, oh, mom and dad spent this much money, or they did this. And it's like, oh, no.
So that stuff pretty much gets ingrained, though. I think if you have a coach that you're like 7 or 8 and they're super negative, then that just sticks.
Those voices
around
are
forever,
there,
right?
yeah. And so that's something that with the athletes and individually, we talk about like, well, whose choice was that? That wasn't your choice to spend this much money to do this. Like your parents made that decision, and shame on them. They shouldn't be
making you feel
guilty about an independent financial choice that they made. And that's where, I might have a meeting with the parents just to talk about that. Because, as a parent, you're just in that moment. You can see their perspective. They're frustrated. It's whatever. It's annoying. It's frustrating. It's expensive. So you can see where they're coming from. But again, good intentions, not always the best execution.
And I found, too, that, if a parent played a sport and then their kid is playing it, you get a bit of an issue there where they, I don't know, not to say that they might know what they're talking about, but then they think, maybe because they played baseball that they have some sort of insight and they could, and then I always feel like that dynamic gets weird too because they might be telling a kid something that's in conflict with maybe what their coach is telling them, and then this kid has all this stuff kind of going through his brain. He doesn't know who to listen to, or if there's coaches giving conflicting advice. And
definitely some
usually the adults
that do that,
with the brain, I guess.
And then I have some athletes who have parents that were athletes, and they were like, we sit away from everyone. We have been there. We are the parents that are like far corners of the bench. We don't ever say anything. So it can definitely go both ways. But then, in circling back to the coaches and talking with coaches, I know that's a big stressor is the sideline coach parent, which now they're getting conflicting information. Now the athlete's distracted. It's sometimes going against or opposing what the coach of the team is saying. And for the coaches, and from some of the coaches I talk with, that can be a real frustration.
Well, I used to coach junior high wrestling, and it was at Saucon Valley, and they have a great high school coach, and the program's really well. So we would get the kids from youth that maybe their dad coached them. So when they were in 6th grade, the wrestling youth father coached them. 7th grade, now they're with us, so they're practicing every day. It's almost like a high school program, and we would have to squash that almost immediately. There would always be a kid or two that would be looking at the stands in between periods instead of over at the coaches. So, period ends, look at the coach, they'll tell you what to do, what position, whatever. But then they would look over there and we would have to kind of fight that battle sometimes. And I always felt, too, some of the sports that are close with parents and the athlete, I coach football, too, and the parents are up in the stands, so they could yell all they want. It's probably not really going to get to you. But, with wrestling or a sport like that where it gets fairly intimate, it could get a little troublesome, I guess. But that was one side of it. The second part I wanted to ask, though, why is it just it's just in all areas of life, I guess, but the mental side of things is people don't take it serious and they just kind of poo-poo it for some reason.
They do. The question I pose to America is, how is that working for you?
Right. I literally just did this. Because it's not. Last podcast was about this book, Tribe. Have you ever read it? Sebastian Junger?
No,
the guy that wrote The Perfect Storm. But he was a wartime journalist, and he came back from one of these trips with just some PTSD. So he goes into just even going hundreds of years ago, where people would they would run away from Western society and go live with these Indian tribes, but nobody from the Indian tribes were coming into Western society. People wanted to go and be a part of these communities. Everybody felt equal, everybody felt good, society was great, but then now we don't have that anymore. And so the whole book's kind of about that and how I don't like what you said, it's not really working well. There's a lot of people that are kind of struggling with everyday things.
Culturally, I think there's a big piece of overall American culture, and then when we look in the culture of athletics in general too, there's this big push of the uncomfortable feelings are bad. We don't admit to them. If you have them, you're weak.
Yeah.
And then especially with how we raise, and for males in our culture, it's notably worse. At least for females, there's hey, go talk with your friends, be more supportive of each other. But for boys, they don't have that, and that's generally not the messages that they're being sent. But now what we're seeing as these boys get older and grow up, it's causing a big problem, not only for them, but also the other individuals in their lives. Middle-aged white men have one of the highest suicide rates. We also are seeing now the impact of men's low emotional IQ and lack of social support, and its impact then on their female partners, and it's causing not good things in relationships. It's very much contributed to divorce rates. And so it's it's not working, you know, but it's still the message that we were being sent at times, you know, whether it's from old school coaches, old school ways of thinking. I've even had athletes where their moms come in because like their dads just don't get it. And it's like, okay, what message is that sending? You know, because ultimately we're going to go through stuff in life, whether that's in sport, you're going to have great days of practice and amazing games. You're also going to lose. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to have the bad days. And then same thing in life. You know, we can prepare, adapt, adjust, go to school, do all the things, but car accidents are going to happen. There's going to be 7 work deadlines all at one time. There's going to be family stress, health issues. Like there's going to be things. And if the only thing that we're teaching and telling people to do is just bury it, forget about it, shove your head in dirt, don't talk about it, come back to work or your sport or life tomorrow and just be okay, that's not a sustaining model. And so we need to help promote people to be okay and admit like, hey, those uncomfortable feelings, they're just uncomfortable. You know, like they would have evolved out of us if they weren't important.
Yeah. So some sort of evolutionary component to that as well, right?
Whenever I talk with athletes, like I kind of talk about feelings, and I really address this issue of how culturally we just don't talk about them, or we only talk about the good ones. But in reality, like we wouldn't have emotions if we didn't need them.
Yeah.
Things evolve out of us when they don't have a function, but they do. And so clearly there's necessary for it. We're just over time kind of taught that the uncomfortable ones are bad, when in reality they're just giving us a different set of information. And as an athlete, if you're able to be aware of what your emotions are, you're able to acknowledge what they are and know what to do when you are having those emotions and feelings, which only comes through practice and time.
Yeah.
Well, now you're that athlete that in the middle of that playoff game, in the middle of that crunch time situation, or when you have stuff going on outside of sport, which we all do, but you still have to come into your game and focus because you have to, you're now able to do that more successfully than those athletes that are kind of oblivious without that awareness.
So then, I mean, we're talking about males primarily, and you do work with high school football teams.
Mm-hmm.
So those are like the stereotypical worst coaches ever in the sense of, which I was one for like 10 years. A coach anyway. Hopefully not a bad one. But, you know, in terms of like, I don't know, you see some bad stories, it might involve football coaches.
Well, you know,
so it's like,
the thing that so at this point, I think across the board with sports psychology too, is there are some people that totally get it. Like they are on board, they see the utility of it. You know, if we want to generalize, you know, it might be coaches on like the younger end of the spectrum.
Yeah.
But then there are some other coaches where they're like, absolutely not. Like,
it's hard to find good coaches.
This is not something that we're going to do. And then there's those in the middle that really don't have an opinion either way.
Yeah.
And just based on the experiences of the coaches around them, they'll kind of lean in one direction. And so I've been very fortunate that the coaches that I work with are those that do get it.
All of them. Like if there's 10 guys on a staff,
the utility.
They're all on board for the most part?
Right now I work with Emmaus Football, and they are like
all in?
On board.
Cool.
Yeah, the
Good
coaches
them,
will sit in the back and they'll watch, you know, the presentations as well. I mean, I've worked with some sports where I could tell the coaches aren't as on board, you know, as evidenced by, oh, okay, athletes, you have to watch and listen, and then they'll go in the back and like sit on their phones.
Good example.
You know, I know. I'm like, oh my gosh. Like, but hey, you know, it's ultimately it's a process, and I know it's a learning experience for a lot of people too, that they don't know what to expect. But you know, I've been really fortunate to work with a lot of coaches that do get it and see the value and see the benefit of it, whether it was through experiences that they've had as coaches, or just from their own personal experience as an athlete growing up and what they experienced. It's a lot of them really do get it.
So two thoughts, and they both kind of deal with social media. Number one, like you see these guys that are like super rare, super uncommon. They're the ones that are like telling you like, who cares? Keep pushing, you know, like yada, yada, yada. And I feel like some of those guys, they're like the 1% of the 1% that it might be okay for them to do that, but not everybody else will be able to like just keep grinding, and who cares about anything else going on, just keep kind of plowing forward. So I think people see that and they think that that's the way to live. And if I want to be like this person, I need to like, I don't know, but that person's like super rare and unique that not everybody's like that. So, but also too, like, what about the role of like social media then that you see with high school kids now? Is this in discussion with teams, or is it more about performance based? I mean, when you're in there,
it's a really fine line with the athletes, because on one hand, I know that they get that messaging all the time of like, get off your phone. And we know that it's bad for us. I mean, there's so much evidence and research supporting that it is an addiction cycle that's getting triggered. It is preventing them from actually dealing with those more uncomfortable emotions. So now their skill set in managing tough emotions is actually dwindling. It's negatively impacting focus. And I am not the only adult that's going in there to probably tell them, like, stay off your phone. So with recognizing that, I try to take a very different approach with it. Because if I'm yet another person that's going to be like, stay off your phone.
Doesn't work.
No. Yeah. They're just going to drone me out, and I'll be like that teacher from Charlie Brown where it's like, like they actually are not actually hearing the words. And so I try to communicate to them how their phone can get in the way of all the hard work that they're doing.
Yeah.
And I compare it to Russian roulette. So if I have trained my whole season or throughout the season and off season, and I'm going to workouts and I'm being mindful of like my sleep or hydrating, and I'm sacrificing time with friends because I maybe have an early practice, or I am just sore all the time and busting my body and doing all of these things, why within that morning of a game or throughout a competition, why do I want to put that all at risk for a notification goes off on my phone?
Yeah.
I have no idea what it's about to tell me. It could be great news. Awesome. It could also be drama.
Yeah.
It could be someone just there more often than not, it is a stressful thing. And when we hear that notification go off, it actually stimulates our stress response in our body. And so you're actually losing a little bit of energy every time you just hear that, but even if you don't go and get it. And so not only are you tiring yourself out and wasting your energy, you also are playing roulette if you check your phone at any point in time on that day of competition. Or I work with a lot of swimmers, and so they have a lot of time to kill sometimes in between their events. So it's Russian roulette every time you check your notifications. And so I try to approach it in that way, of just showing them it's totally your choice. Do you want to put all of this hard work? Is that worth the gamble of checking whatever notification is there? Or is it just worth it, like, hold on a couple hours and get back to them later?
So they just have to believe what you're telling them and not just be like, yeah, it's not a big deal.
They have to make the choice. What's their, at that point, it's in their hands. I'm going to give them this perspective to think about. But if you want to check your phone and make that risk of now mentally and emotionally derailing you after 9 months of training, that's on you, man.
Yeah.
Like, this is your training. I'm just going to give you a suggestion of maybe putting your phone on airplane mode.
Yeah.
You can still download your music playlist, so you have your music, you have like whatever, you still have it, but just maybe disable it and turn off the notifications so that you can do what you need to do that you've been training for 9 months for. But hey, it's your life. It's your call. What gamble investment you want to make.
That whole stress response too. Like, let's say you have a big competition the next day and your phone's buzzing at night. Then your recovery.
Your recovery and sleep is awful.
Even
you just wake yourself up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a terrible vicious cycle. Now, what about the other side too, with just self-image type stuff with like social media? Anything in that regard, in the sense of like just?
Oh yeah, it's horrible.
How much of that?
Is that a blanket statement? Yeah, it's giving, yet another. We used to have those unrealistic expectations, whether it's body image or what we should theoretically look like or act like or be like, or how much awesome our apartment's supposed to look like. We had magazines and TV for that, and now you literally have it following you around everywhere. Yeah. And so my heart goes out to parents trying to navigate that stuff, and my heart goes out to the athletes and people that are trying to navigate it, because the trolls, the bullies, they follow you, and you also get this very unrealistic image of what bodies are supposed to look like. Lighting is totally a thing. Angles, there's all of these things that we don't see that go into the 100 pictures before that person chooses to post the one.
Right.
And so whenever I talk, just with teams about that, I try to, if we ever go in the body image direction, it's just giving them that knowledge just to be aware. I don't think people are just going to go off of social media and stop following all these accounts.
Yeah.
Even if, we had this massive campaign to do so for health or body image. But if you're going to be on it, at least be on it with that awareness of Photoshop, with that awareness of where this message of this perfect, and I say perfect in quotes, body type is coming from, who's sending that message, who made those choices. Because there are decisions that have been made for us of what those look like, that we grow up with those messages around us. So at least if you're an educated consumer of that in typical media, but then also digital media, at least you have a better mental filter that you're putting these things through. In addition to, I encourage the athletes I work with, be mindful of the accounts you follow. If there's accounts that just make you feel perpetually like crap about yourself, how about not? versus there are some really body positive, or there are actually some good accounts out there that are inspiring. And maybe, for every 10 crappy ones, there's one good one. Okay, I'd probably agree to that ratio, and that's probably even being pretty conservative about it. But you can find these things, and it's just being aware of the media that you're consuming.
So just seek out things that make you feel good instead of, right.
Don't
simple,
emotionally
right?
cut yourself.
Why?
It's not fun.
Nobody really puts up I don't want to say nobody, because there is probably that 1 in 10, but like, it's always just the good stuff, really. Everybody appears to be living a great life online, but then when you look at the bigger stuff we were talking about before with, how's that working for you,
Right.
It's not the case in society, really. Not everybody's living that way and feeling good about everything in their own life. So, I was just wondering too, but it's hard to probably sell that to a 12-year-old.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's an uphill climb and battle,
Yeah.
and that's where I think, approaching it from like that performance perspective of, hey, man, it's your choice. You've trained this long.
Yeah.
What do you want to do? And so just trying to help meet them where they're at, right? All of their friends are on it. They think it's cool. And so we have to kind of just try to meet them where they're at and just look for those opportunities of, is phone usage or social media usage going to decrease? No. But maybe how are some ways that we can kind of curb it, or at least monitor, or not monitor it, but at least encourage them to have the right stuff on it. If they're going to be on it, maybe think about having this type of content on your feed versus this. And here's some things to think about as to why.
Why don't you, I don't even know if this has an answer. Why do you think people are drawn to like stuff that almost makes them feel crappy?
Oh, because and even there's interviews now with some of the creators of Facebook and stuff, some of them that like aren't even employed with the company anymore, who feel bad because they've designed their algorithms and ways to function straight up on behavioral principles of psychology. So they're reinforcing us and engaging, and that's where it's literally the exact same system as alcohol and drugs that gets stimulated when you're on social media and you get likes or you get feedback on your posts and things. It's literally the same system. And so we have basically 10-year-olds that are addicted to something they can hold in their hands, in addition to having like 25-year-olds addicted to like drugs and heroin. It's literally like the 12-year-old equivalent. I mean, that's a very extreme example, but it's working on the same
really.
process.
Yeah, it's probably,
And so that's why they can't get off it, because it's quite literally, neurologically an addiction.
It's very weird.
It is so weird. And they knew what they were doing was they were building that stuff, which in these interviews, when you go back and you watch them, they're from more recently, and they're like, we thought about it, but we didn't really think about it.
It just took off like that.
Right. They thought about maybe the 5-year plan, not so much the 15-year plan.
And then the algorithm thing too. It's like, I wouldn't even know what the motivation would be for a business to take advantage of people's weak psychology. It is very weird and unique. But everybody falls in the trap, I'm sure. I probably got caught up in it too.
100%. It's
weird how it works. So getting off that topic, I guess, maybe more.
Social media, gloom and doom.
So with that, we kind of got into you're working with somebody more long-term, say they are 6 months out from an event or competition of some sort, goal setting type stuff. How do you go about setting that stage in terms of, obviously there's a performance aspect that they want to kind of get to a certain level, but the first day that you sit down, is this goal setting stuff part of the conversation, or do you want to try to understand them a little bit better and get to know them and build some sort of rapport? Just how important are goals, basically, I guess?
So initially it's building that rapport, and if there are certain goals that they want to achieve, we have to create goals. And goal setting, there's a lot of utility for it. There's a lot of support suggesting that if you are setting goals, you are going to get closer to it, you are going to achieve them more, rather than just kind of flailing around. However, you have to set them properly. And so a lot of people will have those long outcome, season ending, performance-based outcome goals, whether it's I want to get this certain time, or we want to have this record, or we want to go to playoffs, or whatever it is, which is great, but you have to make sure you have other goals to support that as well. Outcome goals are awesome. However, you don't completely control them. You could wind up having a great season and your team can play the best game it played all season, but the other team you competed against just played better that day. And if that's going to be what gets in between you and that outcome goal, it's a bummer. So in addition to having that outcome goal, you also have to have performance goals, which are more you versus you, your team versus your team, type goals in addition to process goals. And so when an athlete does have a longer term goal like that, we'll sit down and create a bit of almost like a staircase of, if that is your outcome goal, that long-term performance like outcome goal, well, let's identify maybe 5 to 6 performance process goals that between then and now are things that you're working on.
Like counting backwards, starting with the end in mind and then coming back.
Yep, because if it's something where that goal is 6 months out, well, it's right now, if it's 6 months out, it's so far away. Like, what am I going to do today for that? And so it really kind of breaks that down. Yeah. But also it helps keep you motivated, because if I'm working on something that's not going to come to fruition, or I'm not going to get the benefit or reward from for 6 months, I mean, your motivation is going to totally waver in between then and now. And so having little goals that you can accomplish on your way there then creates that positive feedback cycle that can help increase that motivation and keep you working, and both directly and indirectly change your behaviors to ultimately go up that staircase of goals to get to that outcome goal.
I mean, so you just got to kind of convince them that like what you do today is going to affect your week, and then your week's going to affect your month, and then your months affect your...
breaking it down into smaller goals that maybe, okay, right now if this is your, I don't know, if it's, you want to have like weight-based goals. Okay, if this is your PR for this lift, like you're going to try to get it to here. And how are you going to do that? Well, 2 days a week, you're not going to squat 500 if you're not going to get to 300 first, right? Right.
So you gotta
and so it's, kind of making those piecemeal plans. And then it's also, okay, if there's other performance-based goals, whether it's your reaction time on starts or a certain 40 time or a certain series of footwork or, whatever that might be in relation to what your sport is, that can be its own separate goal. That if you do that, it's ultimately going to help you get to that outcome goal. But you can work on that for a period of 2 weeks or a month or, whatever that is. And you can get that feedback of achieving and reaching that goal completely independently of that outcome goal. But it's something that is ultimately going to help you get to that outcome. And so by having and setting up those things, different mini projects, essentially for you to work on, that lead you up to that eventual outcome goal, or different skills that would be helpful, helps keep that motivation and chunks the time out in a different way.
And it's important to keep these goals reasonable, right? Realistic. So
Specific, realistic.
Yeah. What do you do if somebody is like, I'll just use wrestling for example, they're like 0-20 on the year and their goal is to win a state title. What do you do? How do you navigate that?
And so
how do you bring them back?
Yeah, it's talking with them about how realistic do they feel it is. We should have those goals that are. What?
Do you have to massage that a little bit, or do you just tell them like?
I mean, it's the finesse in the conversation, but just kind of asking like, why I'm kind of confused if you're 0-20.
Like something in swimming, say like, they're 7 seconds off of the state record. That's a lot, right? Probably. Mm-hmm. Like. And that their goal is to beat the state record, and they got 3 weeks to do it, or 3 months, I don't know, whatever it is. Like, how do you see that a lot? Where somebody might sit in, like their coach is telling them, like, or their parents are telling them, like, hey, you got to be district champ, state champ. That's what we're doing this year. Might not be realistic, but then like, how do you get them out of that mindset in the sense of like, we got to win first, like one match or something.
Yeah. And so like the district champ, state champ stuff, that always goes back to control. You can't control that. That person in the lane next to you, even if you want this PR that you're trying to go, their PR that day might be faster.
Yeah.
So we got to take that goal away, or not away, but we just got to put that into perspective. That doesn't matter how hard you might be working that day, so you can't directly control that. So what can we directly control?
What if they're like, what if they don't listen and be like, I'm still going to do it? Like if it was like,
hey,
I still want that to be my goal.
That's great.
You just got to let it ride.
Yeah.
I was just wondering.
And let's add some other goals in addition to that.
Yeah. Something that's achievable maybe?
Yeah, because they're great goals to have. And I mean, I think there's also a time too where that insight and acknowledgement of, okay, if you're still 7 seconds off and you have 2 weeks to do this, let's talk, what are some like typical time drops in a season? And so I think it's through having some conversations where you're, challenging some very unrealistic expectations.
Where it's like not impossible, but highly unlikely. Mm-hmm. Yeah, all right. And then what about, so in terms of like so talked about like adapting to certain things too. There's different like ways that you could do it, like visualization. How does that fit into most of the work that you're doing in the sense of like, I remember hearing a story of it was like a Vietnam prisoner of war guy, never really played golf, but then was in a prison camp for over a year and just visualized himself playing golf. And then when he got out, he was able to play golf like respectably. allegedly, is the story.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then some other cases like that too, where people could get these mental reps. I don't remember the study. It was probably in that book, actually the Mind Gym book, where it was like one group practiced the skill, the other group visualized the skill, and then the third group practiced and visualized. And then that's the group, obviously, that
Right.
had the best. But then there was still improved performance in the visualization group. So, like, how do you handle that stuff in terms of getting people convinced to, like, spend some time every
Yeah,
night
well,
to,
talk about it and tell them about it. 'Cause, I mean, ultimately, 95% of U.S. Olympic athletes visualize. 90% of coaches will say and believe it's important. 26% of them do it in every practice. So I think it's just showing them the evidence of, hey, let me give you some specific examples of athletes that have done this, and here are their stories with it. And then we start talking about why it's helpful. Your brain thinks you're doing it.
Yeah.
And so it's not going to ever replace, like, I can't visualize running a marathon. I mean, I could do that for the next year, but then if I went to actually go run the marathon with that's not going to work out well for me. So it's a supplement. That would be an aggressive feat.
for $1 million.
I'd walk it.
Okay.
If I could walk it, I don't know if I could run it.
I would try hard for $1 million, for sure.
But it's one of those things where I try to just show the utility in how other athletes that maybe within the same sport, that particular athlete I'm working with has looked up to.
Yeah.
And just tell them about, hey, like, this is actually not a joke. Like, your brain thinks you're doing it, and that's why you have to be successful. That's why it is such a powerful tool, not only for decreasing anxiety, increasing confidence, increasing motivation, but it can also help an athlete master certain strategies. And so if they're a gymnast and they're trying to work on an upgrade, visualizing can very much be a tool that is helpful in that process. And so I try to just educate them a lot on the purpose of it and why. And then we start talking, because a lot of athletes, whenever I bring it up, they'll say, oh, I've tried it, but I just kept visualizing myself failing. And so we got to kind of start at the beginning of, okay, fair enough. Any person, or either that or they try to do it for like an hour. And if I never planked before, and they try, that was their goal. They're going to sit and visualize for an hour, and then they couldn't focus for the hour, which, shocker, if you've never done something before, it's, again, not going to run a marathon my first day of running. And so we just talk about how they can start getting into it by visualizing pieces of their competition, and gradually adding on to it to make it longer as their focus increases, and, just how they can start practicing it to make it more a part of just their training regimen.
What about the negative side of things too, though? I mean, do you think getting practice with the negative side of things too, in terms of being able to adapt them when that stuff does
it's
happen?
absolutely helpful. And so that's where
like
you can be
sport
successful.
Like swimming, though,
Perfect example.
What could go wrong?
Tons of things. And so great example is 2008, Michael Phelps, 200 freestyle or 200 fly, dives in, and his goggles start to fill up with water immediately. So by the time as the race is passing, his water keeps filling up in his goggles more and more and more. He can see less and less and less.
How much time is that race?
He's
like how many?
I don't know, for a two fly.
He's world class, but I was just wondering.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
Threw me off on that one. I'm not positive what on the top of my head.
We're talking like 20 seconds or like
no,
a minute?
Like a 400 yards. So he has to. It's probably about like 2 minutes.
Oh, so he had 2 minutes of water in the eyeballs.
At least, yeah, because he has to swim. If it's long course, you're doing like 4 long course laps or 8 short course laps. So I mean, you're in there for a good 2 minutes, and so he can't see where the wall is coming, where it ends. Nothing. He'd visualized that. So as that started to happen, he didn't start to panic, and he visualized himself having to swim that race without being able to see, because if that situation would happen, that's exactly what's going to happen. And he won the gold medal. He knew exactly. He knew exactly the amount of strokes he needed to take. He had swam that race so many times in his head and mentally prepared for that adverse situation that when it happened, like crap, but he was prepared for it. He'd visualized it. He didn't panic. He executed the plan. And so you absolutely can visualize adverse situations, whether that's equipment malfunction, whether that's getting anxious before a game and then helping yourself calm and relax and visualizing yourself doing that successfully and having a good game. You can visualize these adverse situations and see yourself navigating through it successfully. And that's a great use of visualization, as well as visualizing yourself playing the game.
So you can visualize yourself calming down before the game. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's cool. I didn't really think of that. aspect of it. But with like a sport like swimming and even like gymnastics, if you could get mental reps, they're just so physically demanding that long term, your body would probably appreciate that a lot more if you could get those mental reps in where, instead of getting pounded every day with your practices and training, you can kind of take a break and recover and let your mind do some of that work. How about with so obviously that is a situation that Michael Phelps planned for through visualization, but what about if, say you have the biggest competition of your life and then that previous night you have awful nights of sleep, who knows what happened, something terrible happened, dog got sick and you slept for 4 hours, you still have to be able to get yourself up and compete the next day. So throughout training and stuff like that, is there any way to replicate, would you ever advise somebody to hey, maybe today's not your day, go home, or do you want them to kind of get practice with, dealing with not ideal circumstances?
Yeah, there was a sports psychologist. His name was Ken Ravizza. He was very big in Major League Baseball. And one of his premises and something that he talked a lot about was that as an athlete, you're not going to ever be 100% of the time.
I'm pretty sure this is where I read this, that guy.
Right? And so if you're at 60%, awesome, show up and give 100% of that 60%. And so it's having reasonable and realistic expectations of ourselves, and we're not going to be 100% of the time. And it's probably also going to fall on a game day. We can't always be, it's
or
just
the Olympics,
going to happen.
Or the biggest event of your life. Yeah.
And so, at that point, it's doing the things, in terms of the night's sleep. Well, the night before your competition isn't the most important night of sleep anyway for that reason. And so you should have been that 2, 3, the second night out is the most important night's sleep. So if that then happened, but you had a good night of sleep beforehand, not a big deal. And so there's all of these other things in preparation between keeping certain sleep schedules or fueling, nutrition, hydration, all that kind of stuff that even if you're only feeling 60%, well, part of that you also know of okay, well, at least I'm fueled. At least I know I'm hydrated. Yeah. I know I'm rested. I know that I've been training. I know that before I've had practices where I have felt only 60% and I gave 100% of it and it wasn't terrible.
Yeah.
So there's other things that you can do as an athlete, especially if you are paying attention to these off the court, off the field things and doing what you need to do. Then in those less ideal situations, you've inadvertently prepared better for them as a result.
So I guess ultimately it's just getting focused on the task and not letting all those other things affect you.
Process over the outcome,
guess, right?
yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, and it's that filter, and I love this filter, and it's something I talk with the athletes I work with all the time, but it's can you control it or can you not control it?
I guess it's that simple.
It's I can't control the fact that I only got 4 hours of sleep last night because the dog. What can I control now? Can I get a nap in? Can I do something different about my warm-up? Can I do, there are things now that you are in that situation that you can control versus spending all of my time being frustrated at the dog for, because nothing I can do now.
Yeah.
It's absolutely nothing I can do. I can't control it. I don't love it. I'm not accepting of the situation in terms of I wish it would happen again, but I'm accepting of the situation in terms of it happened. What can I do now?
And then also, too, I think with that book, and I don't even know if it was the man that you talked to with baseball, but they talked about the law of dominant thought in the sense that your actions just follow whatever you're thinking about.
So much.
So if you're thinking about all that crap, you are probably not going to perform to the level you need to.
Yep.
What about with say that softball pitcher, the baseball pitcher that is throwing, honestly, the answer is probably what we already talked about. But, you get those situations where they're thinking about the negative thing. Where I remember, playing darts or something, in college, and you're doing really well, and then all of a sudden you start thinking, I just got to do this to win, or somebody else's, their score's starting to creep up closer to yours. And then it would always mess with my mind and be
yeah.
And then it would start affecting your play. And because you're thinking about not the task, you're thinking about what you shouldn't do, don't miss, or don't throw it over there, and then all of a sudden that's where you're throwing it because that's the thought that's in your mind. So, I guess that's just all part of the process, though.
Yeah, and that's something that I talk with athletes I work with about. I compare it to construction of the majority of human beings. We don't listen to that voice that's in our head, but we all have it.
Yeah.
And if you're sitting there and you're no, I don't. Yes, you do. You wake up in the morning and it's what should I eat today? It's constantly there. It's just so automatic. We don't realize that it's actually there, if that makes sense. If you live by an airport, eventually you don't hear the airplanes over time. You habituate to that sound. We have gotten so used to that voice in our head, we don't even realize that it's there. So often that voice just happens and it tells us things and it guides us in certain directions. And sometimes it's right, but other times it's not right. So I always compare it to construction of like, if we got to build a road to starting to pay attention to thoughts. Starts off with just some dirt, some gravel, then we pave it. Over time it gets stronger and more drivable the more you practice those reps of actually paying attention to it. But in those moments, whether it's golf or baseball or whatever sport, when those negative, or darts, and those negative thoughts come in, if that highway of me paying attention to my thoughts at least exists, and I can catch that negative thought coming in my mind, well, now I can do something with it rather than having no awareness and having the impact of that thought happen anyway. And that is sports psychology.
Yep. Right.
That in a nutshell, like that is the goal.
We might have to just sum it up there then. I want to go to just some of the stuff that you are working on though currently, and then kind of where you're going in the future. We talked about just kind of, you had this MVP mindset thing that I saw, being mentally versatile for performance.
Yeah.
Kind of had to that stuff. Like, where you're going then, and like, do you have any future ideas here in terms of like where you're going to be taking things? I know you're working one-on-one with people, teams, stuff like that.
Yep. And so the whole mission, I guess, behind my MVP mindset is that we need have a mentally versatile performance mindset, just like in any sport. Physically, when you're on the field, no matter what sport that is, you have versatility in the skills that you're going to use on the field. In different situations, you're going to adapt and adjust and do what you need to do that's necessary to help you perform in that situation. Well, we need that same skill set mentally. We have to be versatile in what we have. We can't just have oh my gosh, ignore it, push through it. Like, no, we have to actually have a set of tools that we can use based on what situation you're in that's going to be most helpful for you to get through it at that point in time. And so going forward from here and how I'm developing that, I've had the opportunity, I'm going to be at a human performance conference in San Antonio over the summer, going to eventually be working on some programming that'll be webinar based for athletes across the country to just have access to learning some of these skill sets and learning just some of this knowledge that isn't typically covered in sport.
Is the webinars like modules type things?
Yep,
where they
just
go
different
step by step
modules that'll be step-by-step through learning. So that'll be something that I'm currently working on that'll be launched in the future, in addition to going back again to the Lead Sports Summit over Labor Day weekend in Atlanta for teenage swimmers, ages 13 to 18, females. And so there's a panel of Olympic swimmers, and then 4 female professionals, a confidence coach, a leadership expert, myself, and the sport nutritionist of the Carolina Panthers. And so we give the girls a weekend of lots of learning and stuff like that. So a lot of cool stuff coming up.
What does LEAD stand for?
It's leadership, empowerment, athletic development.
Is it strictly for females, or is it like, oh, cool.
Right now it is strictly, ready for the most 2019 answer?
Sure.
Instagram.
Cool. So
I guess it was 2018 at the time. I found them and reached out to them because it was just being involved in the swimming world. It was cool. I thought it was amazing that this existed.
Yeah.
And so I said, hey, if you guys ever need a sports psychologist, I know one. And so I was able to have the opportunity to talk with the founder, Carolyn Joyce, who was a former Olympic swimmer, multiple team, Olympian, and she is the brain power behind the whole organization. This will be our 3rd summit. We're already sold out with like a 30+ person wait list, and each year it's been growing. And nice. Yeah, so it's exciting. So it's a cool organization to be a part of, and we have some special secret projects that are coming up. Yeah, but I can't announce yet, but we have some things that are in the works. I know. So by the time the podcast is out, they could be released, but I don't know, so I don't want to say just in case. But
how many summits do you do a year with them?
So that was only their second one. This is going to be our 3rd.
Literally the second.
Yeah, that was literally the second ever, and so it's already over doubled what it was from the first year, and
you were there
have
that
been
first
sold
year.
out. I was there the second year. So second and third year. Yep, we had girls from across the world come over, and
how many go? Like you said,
like
it's sold
120 some, and this year might be 130. I can't forget. I don't remember off the top of my head, but we had
have to up that a little bit.
20 some states. We had 3 countries represented. We had girls flying in from all over the place. So this year we're having a parent track.
That's not a lot of people.
And so,
the demand is probably super high. So
yep.
That's
so they're
cool.
like no
and then
skin.
2 things.
Yes.
One, I go to Fiegel for questions because he takes notes all the time. Do you got anything for today?
I do have one.
Yeah, he's coming with a hot take here. What do you got?
it relates back to the disruptions in sports. When an athlete is in like a harmonious flow that they're going through life, really, academics are good, their athletics are good, and they experience a life event like their parent passing or even injuries are a big one. How do you deal with, from a sports psychology standpoint, how do you deal with that athlete?
That's a good question.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And ultimately, our life doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? Like, and we're going to have stuff that happens to us. And so in addition to having sports psychology being an opportunity for an athlete to learn skills, you're also developing a relationship with that sports psychologist. And so as a licensed sports psychologist, I mean, I'm a licensed psychologist. We have confidentiality. We have all of the benefits of that. And so in those situations, you now have this person that you've been learning from, that you're working with, and you're developing this relationship with, so that when life happens, you now have a space that you can talk about it. It's an opportunity to get those emotions out, which is so important to do. And then in that process, whether it is injury or a passing, we can work through it together. And that sports psychologist role can kind of shift away from performance and more into that more emotional support role, where now we can help you process it and get through that situation. Because although it is occurring in a different area of your life, it's going to influence sport. Your mood ultimately is going to influence your rehab coming back from injury. So there's a lot of crossover there. So it's just a great opportunity then for that athlete to be able to work through those life situations, because we get curveballs thrown at us sometimes, and we have to face it to then enable ourselves to get through it.
So he said something too about just being in the flow of things, like, the flow states and stuff like that. Getting in and out of those things, is that something you deal with too much with like, the people that you work with, where they get into these like optimal levels? Or
we talk about it, and that's, the researchers tries to find like, is there a way to, make this flow state happen? And the thing about it is, it's so hard to study, because it's so, like, either you're in it or you're not, and you know it or you don't, and so they do have some things that for athletes, and every athlete, there's going to be individual differences, but it's really thinking of that performance curve, and it's trying to find that sweet spot. And so what do you as an athlete need to do that can help you get there? And, that's going to be a lot of what's in your environment, but then also what are you thinking about, and ultimately making sure you don't overdo it. And so it's, the flow state stuff is really interesting, in thinking about the mindset that's required to have it, in addition to just the body being like ramped up. We're all sitting here very like chill right now. Like, we would not be in a flow state.
No,
we'd have to ramp it up a bit,
Ramp it up.
So it is really interesting. Just
I read that it was a ton, like how getting into it is like basically the adventure sports. The book was like Decoding Superman or something. So all these people that do these out crazy. Like that Alex Honnold free solo type stuff, like he gets in and out of these flow states, and like just like that. So
and athletes that are good at it and can do it and manipulate themselves around that performance curve and
I think he knew how to get himself there too.
Oh yeah, I would imagine.
Yeah, so it wasn't even like so. But then there's that point too with him where we are relaxed here too, and when he's climbing, he's totally relaxed. Like, he's not like, but yet he's still at this optimal level. So it's kind of weird.
Right, and that's where it's really balancing that, right? Where he's really on top of that curve, because his body is warmed up, it's awake, it's alert. Like, that focus is.
But it's relaxed, because he talks about like energy too, in the sense of like he cannot be tense and using energy that he doesn't want to use, because he needs it all. If not, he's going to fall, and he doesn't have any support. So that'll be that. And then I guess just if we were to kind of sum some things up. Like, short answer, pre-game jitters. Somebody asks you for advice. What do you go with? I don't know if the answer would just be like breathe for everything, but somebody's super nervous before a game. What do you tell them? You got one day to work with them, so it's like going to happen later that day. What do you tell them? You
got to breathe, and then we have to talk about what he needs to focus on.
Yeah.
And so are we just putting our brain on the breathing? Are you closing your eyes and visualizing something? Do you have like a mantra that you're using, a word or a phrase, and so we ultimately have to have our body and our brain on the same page. And so we got to chill our body out, and the breathing is really like our jugular way of being able to do that, because it domino influences everything else. But we also have to have our mind working in a direction that's going to be helpful, not working against whatever we're trying to do physically.
Do you know Wim Hof, the Iceman? This guy, he does all these incredible things, but he uses his breathing to do it. So his wife, like he ran a marathon in the desert without drinking water. He's climbed Mount Everest to a certain point, like without shoes and a shirt on. And he's taken people that have been sick with like a virus and has somehow healed these people without medicine. It's really weird. But he was on like Tim Ferriss's podcast. His wife committed suicide. He's trying to fight depression through breathing, basically. And they asked him, like, hey, if you had a billboard that could say one thing on it and it just said breathe, he said a curse word after it. But, like, that was what his billboard would say. Like, if it was in L.A., the most, yeah. So, anyway, I'm thinking that's the way that this would go, too, with some of the answers. But, like, the pregame stuff, breathing. If somebody's up at night stressing themselves out, say it's a weight sport like wrestling, they got to make weight the next day. They're worried about not making weight. Like, what do you navigate in there? Trying to get them focused on, like, say somebody's they're losing sleep because they're stressed out. They're super anxious towards, maybe they might not make weight for the tournament. Like, what kind of advice there?
I will often give the athletes I work with progressive muscle relaxation audios. Yeah. And so, that's just another tool that they can have at home where they're engaging their mind, but they're also breathing and relaxing while also tensing and relaxing their muscles. Yeah. And that can be helpful because
like
ultimately.
A forceful contraction?
Yep. They're just like gentle, like tenses and relaxes, but it's focusing on that body head to toe, just starting to relax every muscle group. And so ultimately in those moments, if you're like, oh my gosh, I need to sleep, I need to make weight, like, your brain is just going in a direction that's going to work against you relaxing your body. Yeah. So we have to get that brain on a different railroad. And so we're going to bypass it over. And so I like having some of those audio things that I'll send over to my athletes that they have as a tool, that they have as something they can use. But it's also just a really great relaxation exercise as well. But in situations where they're having a hard time sleeping, now we're going to give their mind something to engage with that can help them relax versus continuing on this like hamster wheel of, oh my gosh, I have to make weight, I have to go to sleep, I'm losing sleep, I'm only going to get this much sleep left, because that's just, you can just stress yourself out. Yeah.
And then everything too seems to, even in athletics, that people don't think about the relaxed part of it. Like everything that you do, every muscle action, there's a contraction and a relaxation going on, and everybody just kind of focuses on probably like the contracting part of things. But like if you're throwing a ball, say a football, the tricep is going to extend this, but the bicep is going to relax at the same time that you do this, and it's going to like slow your arm down. So with everything, it's like and even like Bruce Lee with karate kicks, say, or a punch, there's a relaxation and then a forceful contraction. Like everything is relax and contract, and I just think people don't remember that relaxed part of things. And even with those muscular contractions, if you're just squeezing and then relaxing, like that's got to have this effect on your heart rate and breathing and all that.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So how about the breathing stuff too, where people, chest breathing, belly breathing, like anything about that in terms of like, you get in these stressful situations, people probably aren't taking the appropriate breath.
We just have to slow it down and take deep breaths.
Just kind of refocus, recenter somehow, some way?
You got to, because normally if we're in those more stressful situations, we might take like shallow, quick breaths, and so we have to take a slow, deep breath, being very purposeful about it. And so it's trying to, fill your belly up with air. If your belly starts to expand, you know that you're breathing in a lot of oxygen because it's taking up real estate since your stomach's expanding. And so it's taking slow, controlled, deep breaths, and not just one. We could take more than one.
And then what's like the most common issue you'll see with like, high school athletes, say? Like what's that number one thing that if you were going to write a, book geared towards
anxiety, period.
From like school anxiety,
both.
Like everything, all around.
Yes.
Parents, school, sports, everything.
Mm-hmm. SATs, ACTs, colleges, where I'm going to go, recruiting, school, AP classes. I mean, it's just, our world's gotten increasingly more competitive.
Yeah.
The youth sports in and of itself has gotten increasingly more insane and crazy, but with all of that ramp up in competitiveness and expectations, we haven't provided people with strategies to help them manage it and to help them get through these like continuing elevated expectations. So that's where coming in and working with teams, that's what I like to do, is just to provide them with a strategies, a skill set, a knowledge base that they otherwise are not exposed to, but is so helpful in helping them navigate not only whatever sport I may be in there talking about, but also academics, social life, and beyond.
Cool. Fiegs, anything else? You had any questions for me? I forgot to tell you. I sometimes tell my guests they could ask me some questions at the end, but I totally forgot to bring it up beforehand. So you couldn't think of anything. All right, I think that'll be it then. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah,
it was nice doing it.
Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah, thank you guys. See you, everybody.